What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Of business is general questions, and at question number 1 I call Meghan Gallacher.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it produces guidance for local government on how allegations of sexual misconduct against councillors should be handled.
Minister Ben McPherson.
The guidance on handling such complaints is produced by the Independent Ethical Standards Commissioner. Allegations of sexual misconduct against a councillor whilst performing their duties should be dealt with by the Ethical Standards Commissioner as a breach of the councillor's code of conduct. Moreover, if a criminal offence may have taken place, then that should of course be dealt with by Police Scotland. Sexual misconduct is an issue which all parties should and do take very seriously, which is why the Scottish Government are currently taking forward measures to prevent individuals on the Sexual Offenders Register from being councillors.
Meghan Gallacher.
Presiding Officer, last week an SNP councillor who claims to have been sexually assaulted by former North Lanarkshire Council leader demanded reform over how the SNP handles sex complaints. This is the third claim of sexually inappropriate behaviour made against this individual. Instead of supporting victims, North Lanarkshire SNP closed ranks. One councillor even claimed that Mr Linden had done nothing wrong and the only thing he was guilty of was being young. So can I ask the Minister if he agrees with me that victims should be protected by political parties, and do you think that councils should have additional measures in place for councillors should political parties fail to support them?
Thank you. Minister, on matters for which the Scottish Government has general ministerial responsibility.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As you have alluded to, I cannot comment with regard to political parties. However, I would refer to the member to my first answer. It is unacceptable that people and considerations about how we move forward, and it is unacceptable that people who are potential predators could be councillors, which is why we are undertaking measures to improve matters, which is why we're taking forward a review of Section 31 of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973 to bar individuals who are on the sex offenders register from being councillors and continuing to consider matters within the Code of Conduct.
Thank you. Question number 2, Clare Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what its initial assessment is of the potential impact of the Windsor Framework on Scotland's economy.
Minister Ivan McKee.
We welcome the Windsor Framework, which offers an opportunity for the UK to reset its relationship with the European Union. However, the Prime Minister, by setting out his view that the framework puts Northern Ireland in an unbelievably special position, has accepted that Scotland is not a major competitive disadvantage and has made crystal clear the immense damage the UK Government's hard Brexit deal is causing to Scotland. Despite voting overwhelmingly to remain, Scotland has been forced out of the EU, out of the single market, of the customs union, and we have lost freedom of movement rights, which was so important to the Scottish economy. The Office for Budget Responsibility confirmed last week that as a result of Brexit, long-run UK productivity will fall by 4%, which is the equivalent to a loss in annual national income of around £100 billion compared with continued EU membership. Given this hard Brexit, supported not just by the current UK Government, but also by the Labour Party, it's clearer than ever that it's only by becoming an independent country that Scotland can regain the huge economic benefits of EU membership.
Clare Adamson.
Thank the Minister for his answer and concur with my concerns over the Office of Budget Responsibility report. Can he give any comfort to Scottish businesses right now who will continue to suffer by a damaging hard Tory Brexit, and what he can give them in terms of comfort as they look across to Northern Ireland and see the advantages that Northern Ireland will have over Scottish businesses with access to the free market?
Minister.
Yeah, of course we recognise, as I've said in my earlier answer, the damage that this can do to the prospects of Scottish business, and of course the Scottish Government will continue to work with businesses in Scotland to support them as best we can, given the damage that the UK Government is doing by these steps. The people in Scotland are given a clear mandate for a referendum on Scotland's future. Scotland, of course, has huge economic potential, but the UK economy, particularly post-Brexit, is now lagging behind many EU and international comparators. So should the people of Scotland vote for independence when given a choice, Scotland will get the full range of powers and the ability to rejoin the EU to build a country that is wealthier, more successful and fairer than the UK.
Question number 3, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it will begin to set out its proposals for the NHS Scotland Infrastructure Investment Plan post-2026 in relation to new build hospitals.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Yousaf.
An exact timeline has not been agreed for when the next Scottish Government Infrastructure Investment Plan for 2026 and the following 5 years will be published, but in line with previous iterations of the plan, I'd expect it to be published in late 2025.
Edward Mountain.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I wrote to you, Cabinet Secretary, and all other SNP leadership candidates last week, asking if you would support a new acute general hospital for the Highlands and Islands to replace Raigmore. I know you've been very busy and have been unable to give me an answer. So now's your opportunity, Cabinet Secretary. Do you support my call?
Yeah.
Cabinet Secretary.
Replying back to Conservative MSPs should have been my priority. Forgive me that I hadn't got round to Edward Mountain. But let me say to him that I'm very proud of Scottish Government. They might want to listen to the answer. I'm very, very proud of Scottish Government investment in our Highlands and Islands. Scottish Government, of course, we are supporting, and I announced £5 million of capital investment in upgrading maternity services at Raigmore. Our Highland National Treatment Centre has an investment of £48.5 million. I've had the pleasure, as Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, to open 2 new community hospitals, one in Aviemore and one in Skye in September 2021 and March 2022, respectively. In terms of Raigmore, there's no doubt at all that Raigmore will require significant investment, either through a full refurbishment or indeed replacement. And of course, we'll work closely with the NHS Highland to identify the best way forward.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise as to when we are likely to see construction of a new Crosshouse Hospital in Ayrshire? The UK Government promised 40 new hospitals in England, the construction of which has been hampered by a lack of cash, is years behind schedule and moving at a glacial pace, to quote Saffron Cordery, Interim Chief Executive of NHS Providers. We don't want to follow the Tories' appalling example.
Cabinet Secretary.
Indeed, and of course investment in our infrastructure, investment in health and social care is challenging because of course, the Conservatives' economic vandalism, which means that at peak inflation, our budget is worth, health and social care budget alone is worth less by £1.2 billion. The Scottish Government budget worth less by the amount of £1.7 billion. NHS Ayrshire and Anne are working on their Caring for Ayrshire programme, which is an exciting, it's an ambitious programme that will transform health and care services right across Ayrshire and Arran. Their vision is that care shall be delivered as close to home as possible, supported by a network of community services with safe and effective and timely access to specialist services. As part of that programme, NHS, Ayrshire and Arran are considering their acute healthcare estate, which of course includes Crosshouse Hospital and what that will look like in the future. The Government will be fully supportive of this approach, and we look forward to discussing their plans with the Board when they are ready.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Earlier this week, the Health Committee heard evidence from health boards regarding external pressures on their service delivery, including the impact of inflation and increased utility costs. So can the Cabinet Secretary confirm if the Government have considered how to reduce revenue energy cost as part of the infrastructure investment plan proposals, for example through capital investment in systems like district heat networks, which could increase sustainability of the hospital estates and support surrounding communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
We have, and there is excellent examples of where we are introducing such efficient systems, and of course we have an ambition, and I'm happy to make sure this strategy is forwarded on to Paul Sweeney to make sure that we decarbonise our entire health and social care estate. I would also point out to the fact that we have, of course, increased investment in the health service, or will be increasing investment in the health service in next year's budget by a record, £19 billion.
Question number 4, Colin Smyth.
£19 billion.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to tackle the reported exodus of dentists from NHS dentistry.
Minister Marie Todd. Can we have the Minister's microphone? Thank you.
The Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care wrote to all NHS dental teams on 7th February confirming the continuation of the bridging payment to 31st October 2023 while we prepare for the implementation of payment reform. Payment reform will comprise a new modernised system that will provide NHS dental teams with greater clinical discretion and transparency for NHS patients. It's our intention for payment reform to maintain the confidence of NHS dental teams by ensuring the future viability of NHS dentistry in Scotland.
Colin Smyth.
The Minister referred to the confidence, but the reality is, and she'll know from the crisis in Dumfries and Galloway, no one can actually currently register with an NHS dentist. Practices in Dumfries and in Castle Douglas Thornhill have deregistered 20,000 patients. Crucially, those that are registered, half of them haven't seen an NHS dentist for over 2 years. Now, given that the research from the British Dental Association, who warned about this exodus, shows that well over half of dentists have actually reduced their NHS work, what assessment has the Government actually made to changes to the whole-time equivalent NHS dentist workforce since lockdown? And what guarantee will the Minister give that my constituents will actually get to see an NHS dentist?
Minister.
So there's no doubt that there are strong existential forces working on the dental workforce at the moment in Scotland. We're working through the backdrop of a pandemic which prevented work in dentistry for nearly a year and impacted on it for quite a period after that. We had a whole year of dental students not qualify, and we had Brexit happen. In the area that you mentioned, Dumfries and Galloway, 1 and 2 of the dentists were European. So the Scottish Government has put in place a framework of support to encourage more dentists to work in remote and rural areas, including in areas of the south of Scotland. That includes the Scottish Dental Access Initiative, which provides capital funding of up to £100,000 for the first surgery, £25,000 per additional surgery to dental providers setting up a new practice. And also, we've got an enhanced recruitment and retention allowance of up to £37,500 for newly qualified training, and we put in place that framework to help mitigate the worst effects of Brexit on the reducing supply of dentists to Scotland.
Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Since Brexit, the rate of EU and EFTA dentists joining the register has halved, even though the opposition would deny this. Given that, can the Minister provide an update on the steps the Scottish Government is taking to improve access to NHS dental services in those areas which are particularly affected by these challenges?
Minister. The member is absolutely correct that the consequences of Brexit are invariably having a disproportionate impact on NHS dental services in many areas, and that does include the area of Dumfries and Galloway, as I can hear the member to this side of me shouting from a sedentary position. We have already seen improvements from the framework that we have put in place. We've seen a positive impact. I've already heard that Dumfries and Galloway have received expressions of interest for potential grant funding for opening new dental practices, which the Scottish Government will absolutely be in a position to fund if applications are successful. But as well as that, it's our intention to make formal representation to the UK Government for dentistry to be included in the shortage occupation list. And we've also have the CDO in active discussions with the General Dental Council to support them in speeding up the application process to clear the General Dental Council backlog.
Thank you. Question number 5 has been withdrawn. Question number 6, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last assessed access to GP services in rural areas.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Youssef.
The Scottish Government published the Health and Care Experience Survey 2021-2022 in relation to people's experience of GP services last year. Health boards and health and social care partnerships are responsible for planning and delivering primary care medical services, and the Scottish Government would expect them to make use of the Health and Care Experience Survey to identify any particular issues with access, including, of course, in rural areas.
Rona Mackay.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Twecker in my constituency has been without a GP surgery since 2019. The ever-growing village is in a semi-rural area on the border between Eastern Bartonshire and North Lanarkshire. The only option for residents is to register in one practice in Kilsyth or between two practices in Kirkintilloch, both some miles away. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that residents deserve a better service than this, and that the HSCPs and health boards in the two local authority areas should work together to find an acceptable solution?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I agree that they should work together. There are obviously options available to the Health and Social Care Partnership and the Health Board there. If there are discussions that are needed with my primary care team and primary care officials, then of course I'll make sure they make themselves available to the Health and Social Care Partnerships, the local authorities involved and the Health Board.
Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary's failure to deliver the new GP contract is the real reason why the British Medical Journal are saying there's a decline in the reported quality of some respects of care in Scotland, with rural areas hit hardest. It is not the fault of overworked practices, but the Cabinet Secretaries who's compounded the error by cutting £65 million from the primary care budget. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit to reinstating this crucial £65 million to primary care?
Cabinet Secretary.
What a brass neck, Presiding Officer. The reason we had to reprofile our money was because of the economic vandalism of the Conservative Party, which meant that our government budget was worth less by the amount of £1.7 billion because that lot crashed our economy. That is a brass neck and a half. So what are we doing, Presiding Officer? More GPs per head in Scotland than any other part of the UK. 3,220 multidisciplinary team staff members recruited here in Scotland. So yes, we will continue, the SNP government will continue the record investment in health and social care, and I'll leave it to the Conservatives to moan from the sidelines.
Question number 7, Stephen Kerr.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the status of NHS Forth Valley since its escalation to Stage 4 of NHS Scotland's National Performance Framework.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Youssef.
Yes, I'm happy to provide an update. There are some signs of improvement in performance within NHS Forth Valley. An example in children and adolescent mental health services, we've seen some improvements in terms of waiting lists, not where we want it to be, but certainly there have been some improvements. This and other work has been taken forward by the Assurance Board and the external support team chaired by Christine McLaughlin. In that role, she is engaged with a wide range of stakeholders, including local authority chief execs, the Area Partnership Forum, compromising of local trade union representatives.
Stephen Kerr.
The RCN and Unison reported very serious concerns over unsafe practices and a culture of intimidation, and an independent review found a culture of fear. And the BBC Scotland disclosure programme on the NHS was grim viewing. In it, a trade union representative at Forth Valley said that staff were watching patients die and did not feel they'd been able to provide a decent, high-quality care. Clinical teams have spoken out about wards short of staff and unsupported, patient safety at risk, and staff on duty pushed to breaking point. In November, vacancies were over 10% of registered nurses and nearly 14% for doctors. Can the Cabinet Secretary honestly say he believes the culture at Forth Valley has changed? And what are today's vacancy rates at Forth Valley for doctors and nurses?
Cabinet Secretary.
Stephen Kerr does raise some really important points. It's precisely the reason why I took the decision to escalate Forth Valley to the second highest level of escalation. And one of the reasons, of course, for that escalation was culture. So he's absolutely right to raise these issues. And Forth Valley have brought forward an improvement plan. I'm happy, if he wishes, I'm happy to arrange a meeting between himself and Christy McLaughlin, who's leading that assurance board, that oversight board. There have been some improvements. I've also met with the whistleblowing champion at Forth Valley to reiterate this government's commitment to whistleblowing and to ensure that staff's concerns and anxieties are raised through the appropriate channels. But if it is helpful to Mr Kerr, I am happy to arrange a discussion between Mr Kerr and Christy McLaughlin.
Question number 8, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government what plans are in place to eliminate any spillages of sewage from the sewage network into rivers and lochs.
Minister Mary McCallum.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. As I have reported previously to Parliament, the River Basin Management Plan set out our long-term aims for improving water environment. The plans are supported by Scottish Water's Improving Urban Waters Route Map, which commits to £500 million of investment to improve wastewater treatment works, address unsatisfactory discharges and increase monitoring. Scottish Water has published its first annual report on progress against the route map in December 2022, and this is on its website.
Colin Beattie.
I thank the Minister for her response. I understand Scottish Water has committed to installing a further 10,000 spill monitors by the end of 2024. Can the Minister advise what support the Scottish Government is providing Scottish Water to achieve this?
Minister.
Yes, Presiding Officer, in line with its Improving Urban Waters Route Map, Scottish Water has identified the priority locations for 1,000 new CSO monitors, and installation will be completed by the end of 2024. Scottish Water's their investment programme, is supported by up to £1.3 billion of lending from Scottish Government across 2021 to 2027 period. And, Presiding Officer, as this week we mark World Water Day and Scotland's role as a hydro nation, I should like to put on record my thanks to everybody who works in Scotland's water industry, who have seen our overall water quality at 66% compared to the equivalent figure of just 16% in England, who have 99% of bathing waters now classified as sufficient or better, and for the up to £147 million which is to be invested in further wastewater improvements by 2027.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As the month of Ramadan begins, can I take this opportunity to wish all Muslims in Scotland and across the UK a very peaceful holy month. The First Minister's party said this when asked by journalists just last month if they had lost 30,000 members. As the SNP clearly stated when asked, fewer than 300 members have left the party over the period. The quote continued, "This story is both malicious and wholly inaccurate. Fortunately, few people are gullible enough to believe it. It's since emerged that the story is 100% correct. So why did Nicola Sturgeon's party, the party of government in this Parliament, lie to the press and the public?"
On matters for which the Government has general responsibility, First Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I begin by wishing Ramadan Mubarak to our Muslim community. I think I am in the very privileged position of having, of any constituency in the country, the highest proportion of Muslims living within my Glasgow Southside constituency. I know the holy month of Ramadan is a very special time for Muslims, and I wish them all the best during it. On the issue of SNP members, that issue has been well canvassed over the last few days. I've got nothing to add to what I have already said, except this, Presiding Officer. The SNP remains the only mass membership party in this country. We have by far more members than any other party represented in this chamber. And I think, Presiding Officer, I can say with some confidence that the SNP has more members than all other parties in this chamber combined. However, I can't say that with absolute certainty. So let me say this finally to Douglas Ross. If he wants a conversation, a debate, an interaction about party membership figures, then that surely should be a meaningful one where we can compare and contrast. So before we go any further, will Douglas Ross share with the Chamber how many members his party has?
Douglas Ross. I thought it's very interesting. It's very interesting that the First Minister...
Thank you. Members, excuse me. We will hear Mr Ross.
It's very interesting that the First Minister speaks about confidence in numbers, because those seeking to replace her had no confidence in the numbers her party's chief executive and her head of communications issued to the press. And this is an important issue here in the Scottish Parliament. This is an important issue here in the Scottish Parliament.
Excuse me, Mr Ross. Mr Ross is seeking to ask a question of the First Minister. Can we please do Mr Ross the courtesy of listening? Thank you. Mr Ross.
And this is an important issue here in the Scottish Parliament for the Scottish Government, because they lied. They lied to the press and they lied to the public. That is absolutely clear. And Nicola Sturgeon is treating the Scottish public like idiots with this embarrassing defence.
Mr Ross, if I could just remind you of the requirement of all members to treat one another with courtesy and respect at all times.
No,
and of what not only I, but my predecessors, those who have sat in this chair before me, have said with regards to the use of particular language in the Chamber.
But I think everyone has accepted that the SNP lied over these figures. And the defence from Nicola Sturgeon is embarrassing. The SNP and their story went on like this. They said you don't have points of order. You don't have points of order during First Minister's questions. The SNP said the story.
First of all, I will decide when we are and are not taking points of order. However, as is established convention, I will not be taking a point of order until the end of this session. Mr Ross.
Well, they don't seem to want to hear this, and I wonder why, Presiding Officer, because the SNP's story on these figures continued that the impression in the media was flat wrong. It was malicious and wholly inaccurate. They went on to say nobody was gullible enough to believe the reported reduction of 30,000 SNP members. But the truth is the SNP as a party, did lie. That's why their chief executive and the head of communications has resigned. So why would anybody be gullible enough to believe that Nicola Sturgeon was unaware of what her chief executive and the most senior members of her own party were up to?
Before the First Minister begins, I will remind all members of the requirement in this chamber. We do not use the word lie in this chamber. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I think the only character that is being revealed in this chamber today is that of Douglas Ross. Now, Douglas Ross, as leader of the opposition, no doubt going to be a very long-standing leader of the opposition. Well, unless his party has something to say about that. He chooses the topics that he raises, and that is absolutely right and proper. But let it be noted today, for the people watching right now, that on this, my last appearance as First Minister at First Minister's Questions, Douglas Ross is not asking me about the National Health Service, or education, or the economy, or climate justice. But this is the topic he has chosen: party membership figures. So that is fine. But if we are to have a proper interaction, I don't think Conservatives, given yesterday's events in the House of Commons, should be lecturing anyone about honesty and integrity. But coming back, Presiding Officer, if we are to have a debate
about party membership figures, then before we go any further, perhaps Douglas Ross would answer the question that I posed last time and that we're still waiting for an answer on. How many members does the Scottish Conservative Party have? Surely he knows. Tell us.
Douglas Ross.
Nicola Sturgeon started a week early. When you're on the backbenches, you get to ask the questions at FMQs. In your final one, you're supposed to answer. Now, the First Minister's farewell tour this week has been a masterclass in deceit and political spin. She was too busy, far too busy, to appear in front of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee, but somehow managed to eke out time in her schedule to sit down in Loose Women to debate the great offices of state and the matters of state with Janet Street-Porter. She says her party is experiencing growing pains. This must be the first time that growing pains have actually shrunk something. She claims that she's left her successor a brilliant foundation. First Minister, that's all that's left. The foundation, the house that Sturgeon, Salmond and Murrell.
Sorry, I'm finding it very difficult to hear you from here. I would be grateful if we could hear one member at a time and only those members who I've called. Mr Ross.
I was just saying how the First Minister claimed to have left her successor with a brilliant foundation, but that's all that's left. The foundation, the house that Sturgeon, Salmond and Murrell built is collapsing. And the SNP have said it themselves. Party President Mike Russell admitted this week they are in a tremendous mess. First Minister, he's right, isn't he?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, if he wants to know about collapsing political parties, he should look at a poll about leaders' favourability ratings published this very morning. It does not make happy reading for Douglas Ross. But on the issue of priorities, presiding officer, and these are not the issues I would have chosen to go on today, but Douglas Ross has chosen them. So if he wants to talk about priorities, let me point out that I am not the member of this Parliament that missed a veterans' event to referee a football match. Thank you. Secondly, on that point, presiding officer, I am not accountable to the House of Commons. I am accountable to this Parliament. I know Douglas Ross has difficulty deciding which Parliament is more important to Scotland because he's got one foot in each. But I know which Parliament is most important to Scotland, and it is this one, our Scottish Parliament. And finally, presiding officer, I am proud of the record of the government I have led through some of the toughest times Scotland has faced in recent history. But ultimately, the only people who will cast a verdict on the record of my or future government are the people of Scotland. And in my time as First Minister, they have had 8 opportunities to do that. And on each of these 8 opportunities, they have voted for me, for the SNP and for my government. That's a record I'm very proud to stand on.
Douglas Ross.
Well, if the First Minister is proud of her record in government, let's just look at it. In her final FMQs, let's just go over it. On Nicola Sturgeon's watch...
We will hear Mr Ross, thank you.
On Nicola Sturgeon's watch, Scotland's schools have plummeted down international league tables. She has made no progress on the attainment gap and broke her promise to close it completely. The Named Persons Act, the Hate Crime Act, the Gender Recognition Bill were all unworkable. Drug deaths in Scotland are the highest in Europe, 5 times greater than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. And right now, at this moment, 1 in 7 Scots is on an NHS waiting list. And on her final day in this chamber as First Minister, a cross-party committee of this Parliament delivered a damning report on ferries. They found that Nicola Sturgeon personally intervened to prioritise vanity over vessels, leading to huge delays and costing the taxpayers hundreds of millions of pounds. On these and so many other issues, Nicola Sturgeon ignored Scotland's priorities in favour of her obsession with independence. She divided our country and failed on every mission she set herself. First Minister, Isn't that the truth of your legacy?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, for Douglas Ross, that has not been at any point in my time as First Minister the verdict of the Scottish people. 8 election victories in 8 years as First Minister, that's the verdict that matters to me. But let's look at my record as First Minister. Progressive income tax, the Scottish child payment, lifting children out of poverty, the baby box, closing the attainment gap, record numbers of people from backgrounds like mine going to university, a national investment bank leading the way in climate change, abolishing prescription charges, minimum unit pricing, saving lives, record high health funding, the best performing accident emergency departments anywhere in the UK, the Domestic Abuse Act, free period products, expanded, doubled childcare, the promise for care experienced young people, the highest level of school spend per pupil anywhere in the UK, the highest number of teachers per head, 8% more teachers now than when I became First Minister, free tuition for higher education, free bus travel for those under 22. I could go on and on and on, but I'm not going to, because this is my last session of First Minister's questions.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar. Thank you.
Presiding Officer, can I join others in saying Ramadan Mubarak? It's a month of sacrifice, of reflection and charity, and where we remember those that are less fortunate both here at home and around the world. Presiding Officer, we live in serious times with a cost of living crisis and an NHS crisis. And given this is my last opportunity to question the First Minister, I do want to ask about the finishing touches to, I'm sure, will be a handover document for her successor. And I think it's important to check what she believes is in the in-tray for the next First Minister. Because after 15 years of SNP government, there is not a single Scottish institution that is stronger now than when her party took office. From the ferry scandal, the entrenched attainment gap, the NHS crisis, to decimated local services. Which of our government's many failures does the First Minister think her successor needs to address first?
First Minister.
Well, with the greatest respect, Anna Sarwar is just wrong. I mean, let's look, first of all, at some of the institutions that didn't even exist when I became First Minister. Revenue Scotland, for example, making sure that we have the most progressive income tax system anywhere in the UK. Social Security Scotland, delivering benefits to people across the country, including the Scottish Child Payment. The Scottish National Investment Bank, leading this country's drive now to net zero. The NHS, of course, facing real challenges as a result of the COVID pandemic, but still with the best performing A&E departments anywhere in the UK. Tomorrow, I will be in Fife, opening our new National Treatment Centre there that will deliver more operations for people in Fife, and will soon be joined by national treatment centres elsewhere across Scotland. In education, more young people from the kind of background like mine going to university than has ever been the case before. A doubling of early years education and childcare. I think that is strengthening of many, many institutions. Does my successor have a tough job? Of course, because we live in tough times. But I've got confidence that whoever my successor turns out to be, whoever is standing here next week, they will continue to build on that record and they will continue to retain the trust of the Scottish people.
Anna Sarwar.
I know Nicola Sturgeon can try and take credit for lots of things. I'm not sure she can take credit for creating the National Health Service. I think that might have been the previous government. Now, Nicola Sturgeon likes to talk about records. Here are just a few set in her time, piling up in her successor's sky-high in-tray. Record A&E waiting times, with 1 in 7 Scots on an NHS waiting list. Record drug deaths. Record vacancies for nurses and doctors in our NHS. Record levels of children without a home. Record levels of homelessness. I could go on and on, but seeing as it's our last First Minister's questions, I won't do that. It is hard to see how her successor will be able to fix these problems as they were sat round the Cabinet table with her. The decisions taken around that Cabinet table resulted in over £3 billion of taxpayers' money wasted since 2007. That's £1,200 for for every household in Scotland. And at the same time, they spent public money to build a culture of cover-up and secrecy, which is now beginning to unravel, all while Scots struggle to keep their head above the waterline. And given the scale of the challenges piled up in this entry, does the First Minister agree with 2 of the 3 SNP candidates that mediocrity, continuity and incompetence won't cut it?
First Minister. Well, firstly, Presiding Officer, I never claimed to have created the National Health Service, but what I will claim to have done is help protect the founding principles of our National Health Service, because I was a Health Secretary that abolished prescription charges for everyone in Scotland, something that in all their years in government Labour had never ever got round to doing. I also took a hospital privatised under Labour back into the National Health Service. On Anna Sarwar's £3 billion figure, I think we've already shown that in previous sessions of First Minister's questions to be utterly nonsense, but I'm not going to embarrass him by going back to the detail of that again today. But let me use another £3 billion figure, because that is the number for the amount of money this government is investing each year to mitigate the cost of living crisis, to help people deal with Tory austerity. If we were an independent country, we wouldn't have to mitigate Tory austerity. But while Labour still prefers to see this country governed by Tories at Westminster, rather than have self-governance and independence here in our own Parliament, Labour will never ever be taken seriously in Scotland.
Anna Sarwar.
I, like many people right across the United Kingdom, look forward to the next general election when we can boot out the Tory government and we can get rid of the last SNP excuse. Now, the First Minister has spent much of her political career talking about mandates. Her successor inherits this woeful SNP record, but they don't inherit her mandate. The last election was a pandemic election, one in which the First Minister won with a direct appeal from her to steer the country through the pandemic and the COVID recovery. That recovery hasn't even started. In fact, by every metric, things have got worse. And now Scotland faces 2 crises: an NHS recovery that never began and the cost of living crisis, families facing spiralling bills and soaring energy prices. But as her potential successors squabble over their own record in government, they can't escape facts. They don't have a plan for Scotland and they don't have a mandate from the public. And that is why we need an election now. So in my final question to Nicola Sturgeon, does she agree with her own words? There are no words to describe this utter shambles adequately. It's beyond hyperbole and parody. Reality, though, is that ordinary people are paying the price. The interests of the party should concern no one right now. An election is now a democratic imperative.
That was about the Conservatives at Westminster, and one of the differences between me and Anna Sarwar is I don't support Tory government of Scotland because Scotland does not vote for Conservatives. And I fought three general elections as SNP leader, and the SNP has won all of them. And at every one, we've heard the same messages from Labour, and at every single one, the people of Scotland have cast their verdict. I am proud of the achievements of the governments that I have led. Let me end on another one, because it is related to COVID recovery, and it has been achieved in spite of what we're having to deal with from the Conservatives at Westminster. Today, Scotland has record high employment, record low unemployment and record low economic inactivity. We have a good foundation in this country. We face many challenges. But I have every confidence that my successor, who will be standing here next week, will continue to lead this country forward, will continue to take the decisions that are in the interests of this country, and that they will lead this country to becoming an independent nation.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I also wish Ramadan Mubarak to everyone celebrating it, but also on this National Day of Reflection and Commemoration, remember more than 16,000 lives lost to us and the gaps they leave in their communities and their families as a result of the COVID pandemic. She may not know the answer to this, but to ask the First Minister when the Cabinet will next meet.
First Minister.
And that, of course, is a matter for the new First Minister. The only thing I know for certain is that I will not be in attendance. Can I say, though, Presiding Officer, and I will say more about this in the session that follows FMQs, today, of course, marks the 3rd anniversary of lockdown. And my thoughts today, as my thoughts are at some stage in every single day, are with all those who suffered as a result of COVID. I will have them in my thoughts, my mind and my heart for as long as I live.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful for that reply and I share its sentiments. The mental health treatment targets were introduced in December 2014, 11 days after Nicola Sturgeon was sworn in as First Minister. They have never been met, not once in over 3,000 days. That's 99 consecutive months. I have lost count of the number of times that the First Minister told me that the situation was unacceptable. I have lost count of the number of times she promised staff and sufferers that things would get better. But in reality, Nicola Sturgeon quietly downgraded the Office of Mental Health Minister. Her Finance Department, headed by Kate Forbes, slashed £50 million from the mental health budget this winter. And her Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, gave a personal promise to clear waiting lists for both children and adults by March 2023. Presiding Officer, look at the calendar. It's March. We are here, and the SNP are nowhere. There is a sea of human pain out there, so much unmet need. Don't just tell me that this is unacceptable. At this late hour, at the last and final time of asking, will the First Minister admit her government has failed Scotland on mental health?
First Minister.
What I will absolutely say is there is much, much more work to do on mental health. One of the things that has changed, certainly since I was a young person, and has changed even in the years I've been First Minister, is that we have reduced the stigma associated with mental health. More people are coming forward for help and treatment, and that is a good thing, but we must make sure the services are there for them. We have seen a significant increase in the budget for mental health under the SNP. Mental health spending has doubled in cash terms. We see many more people working in mental health services than was previously the case. Coming directly to CAMHS, because it is important and there is so much more to do. The number of children starting treatment for CAMHS in the most recent quarter is the highest on record by some distance, and we're now seeing the most sustained changes in CAMHS waiting lists for over half a decade. The overall waiting list has decreased by more than 9%, children waiting over 18 weeks has decreased by more than 30%, and children waiting over 52 weeks has decreased by more than 48%. So yes, much more to do, but progress being made, and I know it will be a priority for my successor, whoever he or she may be, to continue that progress.
Question number 4, Fiona Hislop.
To ask the First Minister for a response to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's synthesis report.
First Minister.
The evidence has never been clearer than it is now. We are fast running out of time to secure a livable and a sustainable future for the generations to come. This report must lead to an acceleration of global action to tackle the climate emergency. Scotland is making long-term progress towards net zero, but we are now entering the most challenging part of that journey, requiring truly transformational action across society and our economy. This cannot and will not happen without all of us, including everyone across this Parliament, supporting bold steps as part of a national effort to tackle the climate emergency. Lastly, at COP27, Scotland pledged an additional £5 million to address loss and damage, and we will continue to advocate for practical action and finance to support the Global South, where the effects of climate change are already being experienced.
Fiona Hislop.
Following the publication of this report, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres made a plea to all governments. He said, "Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. The report is a clarion call to massively fast-track climate efforts by every country and every sector and on every timeframe. In short, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere all at once. I know how serious and ambitious the First Minister has been in leading on the climate emergency agenda, and I appreciate that. Does she agree that this stark assessment must lead to transformational and accelerated action by all governments, local government, the UK Government and her successor here in this Parliament to combat climate change?
First Minister.
I agree wholeheartedly with Fiona Hislop, and I agree wholeheartedly with the comments earlier this week of the United Nations Secretary-General. There's no doubt that we need concerted action, accelerated action on all fronts. I'm proud that Scotland is, and we are recognised as being at the forefront of the global journey to reach net zero emissions and a climate-resilient future. This Parliament's ambitious climate change legislation requires all of us, governments, individuals, communities and businesses to take lasting action to drive down our emissions in a way that is just and fair for all. But we also need to see action and much higher ambition from the UK Government on the solutions for net zero that are currently reserved to Westminster, and of course we need other countries across the world to match that ambitions too. While Scotland's emissions reduction targets are in line with a global 1.5 pathway, it's vital that other countries revisit and strengthen the ambition of their 2030 emissions pledges and long-term strategies to align with a 1.5 pathway ahead of COP28.
Liam Kerr.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer. The IPCC report...
We will suspend business. Okay, thank you. We will resume business, and I would ask Liam Kerr to begin his question. Thank you.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer. The IPCC report made stark warnings about how, if we're to have any hope of tackling the climate emergency, we must look at all green generation technologies. Now, given that countries such as Japan, Germany and France are swinging behind nuclear-generated energy, which is a zero-emission clean energy source, isn't it now imperative that the First Minister's government looks again with an evidence-based and a science-led assessment at its knee-jerk banning of new nuclear in Scotland?
First Minister.
Can I firstly agree with the sentiment behind that question? We all have to up our action on this, and green energy generation is a vital part of it. But I don't agree on the question of nuclear. Nuclear energy is very expensive. We still don't know what to do with the waste long term. And of course, not all other countries have Scotland's offshore wind potential, for example, green hydrogen potential and other renewable sources of energy potential. You know, ScotWind right now gives us the potential to generate up to 28 gigawatts of renewable energy. That is massive. That will enable us to export as well as meet our own needs. So I think we should focus on renewable, clean, green, renewable energy. That's not just right for the environment. That gives us the opportunity to boost industry, the economy and create tens of thousands of jobs in the future. That's where the focus of this and future Scottish Governments should be.
Colin Smyth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This report is the starkest warning yet that while our world leaders fiddle, the world burns, and we're not on track to hold global warming at 1.5 degrees. But does the First Minister accept that as she leaves office, Scotland is also failing to meet our climate targets? As the Climate Change Committee warns, Scotland is missing so many of those targets that are in danger of becoming meaningless. Now, given that transport remains the biggest source of emissions, does the First Minister regret the savage cuts made to our rail and bus services on her watch mean, well, the dip in car use since 2016 is 12.5%, the collapse in rail numbers is over 50%, and bus passenger numbers is over 40%. And does she agree it is a priority for her successor to reverse the cuts that she made to those services?
First Minister.
Well, no, I don't regret public ownership of our railways. I don't regret the changes to bus franchising. And I certainly don't regret the free bus travel for pensioners and all young people under 22, encouraging people to use public transport. But I do agree that Scotland, like all other countries, must do more. Scotland is doing more to cut emissions and to tackle climate change than almost any other country in the world. I've been privileged to attend COP climate change summits over many years now, and there is a recognition for Scotland's leadership, if not here in this Parliament, then certainly amongst countries overseas. But the bar of world leadership is too low. Every country needs to do more, and we need to do it with urgency, and Scotland must continue to lead by example.
Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. This report is also a reminder that extracting every last drop of oil and gas today will condemn future generations to climate breakdown. Independent research commissioned through the Butte House Agreement has shown that North Sea oil and gas output will continue to fall, while a just transition can deliver an increase in jobs in the years ahead. So can I ask the First Minister, what kind of leadership do we need from the Scottish Government to ensure a future for both workers and the climate?
First Minister.
I think we need to continue the kind of leadership that we have been showing on this issue. I am very clear, while I have the greatest respect for all those who work in our oil and gas sector, they have contributed hugely to Scotland, and we cannot make that switch overnight. We must accelerate the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And as Mark Ruskell rightly says, even if we weren't facing the climate emergency, the maturity of the North Sea would mean that we have to accelerate that transition there. We must do it in a fair and a just way, but we have the potential to do that, and we should grab that potential with both hands.
Question number 5, Stephen Kerr.
Ask the First Minister what the outcomes have been of the Scottish Government's defining mission to tackle the poverty-related attainment gap.
First Minister.
Well, this Government's commitment is to substantially eliminate the poverty-related attainment gap in this parliamentary term, and good progress is being made. The latest Achievement of Curriculum for Excellence levels data demonstrated the biggest single-year decrease in the poverty-related gap in primary numeracy and literacy levels since records began. We are improving outcomes for young people impacted by poverty beyond school too. The percentage of 2021-22 school leavers in a positive initial destination is the highest on record, and the poverty-related attainment gap is at a record low, down 2/3 since 2009-10. More young people than ever from deprived communities secured a place at university, and the previous Commissioner for Widening Access described our approach as an unambiguous success. Presiding Officer, that is a record I am proud of, and I very much look forward to seeing my successor build on it.
Stephen Kerr.
Objectively, the best we can say is the First Minister tried and failed. Because education in Scotland is poorer. Here's her record. Fewer maths teachers, fewer technical education teachers, fewer computing science teachers, fewer language teachers, narrowing subject choice, plummeted down the international league tables, and on CFE levels in primary schools, literacy falling, reading falling, writing falling, numeracy falling, a widening attainment gap, and falling attainment overall. Can she honestly stand there, hand on heart, and say that education was her top priority?
First Minister.
Yes, I can. Now, Stephen Kerr asked me in his question about outcomes. I'm just checking that that was the word in his question. So I gave him the data on the outcomes, and he obviously didn't like it. So he wants to talk about inputs. So let me talk now about inputs. When I became First Minister, the number of school teachers in Scotland was 49,521. Today, the number of school teachers in Scotland is 53,459, an 8% increase. In early learning and childcare settings, the numbers have increased as well. In Scotland, we have the most teachers per pupil in the UK, and education spend per person is higher than in either England and Wales. In Scotland, we have 7,573 teachers per 100,000 pupils. In England, where the Tories are in power, that is just 5,734. In Scotland, we spend £7,600 per pupil. The Tories in England spend just £6,700. Yes, I am proud of this government's record on education, and I really do look forward to seeing it being built upon.
Paul McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The recent Institute of Fiscal Studies analysis of Scottish tax and benefit reform found that lowest income families in Scotland are significantly better off, around £2,000 on average, as a result of this SNP Scottish Government's progressive tax and benefit policies. If this can be achieved with limited powers, how much further does the First Minister think we could go if we weren't beholden to a UK Government with policies that directly undermine this Government's mission to tackle poverty?
First Minister.
Now, I thank Paul McLennan for that question. And again, and this may be the last opportunity I have to point it out, it is really obvious how uncomfortable the Conservatives become in this chamber when we are talking about poverty. And I think that should be noticed. The Institute for Fiscal Studies rightly acknowledges the impact that progressive choices are having for low-income families. They highlight, and I'm going to quote briefly, Presiding Officer, that the Scottish Government have made clearly a distributional choice to channel a lot more money towards low-income families with children in particular, and that has a meaningful impact on incomes. If I had to single out the thing I was proudest of, it is that, helping lift children out of poverty, in marked contrast to the approach of the UK Government's welfare system, where they push children into poverty. That's the difference. That's the contrast.
Question number 6, Jackie Baillie.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to tackle the reportedly high levels of delayed discharge, which are estimated to have cost over £161 million in 22-23 to date.
First Minister.
Earlier this year, we allocated an additional £8 million to support health and social care partnerships to secure extra provision of 300 interim care home beds. To date, this has enabled 408 people to be discharged from hospitals to these placements, with a total of 633 people currently benefiting from an interim care placement. As part of the work of the Ministerial Advisory Group on Health and Social Care Pressures, we continue to work tirelessly with health boards and health and social care partnerships to ensure we are doing everything possible to support people out of acute settings and back into the community when it is clinically safe to do so. Delayed discharge has improved substantially under this government, and it is of course very welcome that over 96% of all people overall leaving hospital are discharged without any delay whatsoever.
Jackie Baillie. Can I thank the First Minister for her response? Since she took office, over £1 billion has been lost to delayed discharge. At her very first FMQs, I raised cancer treatment delays. In 2014, 94.2% of patients started cancer treatment within 62 days, with a maximum wait of 187 days. This is now declined to 74% of patients starting treatment within 62 days and a maximum wait of 326 days. The 31 and 62-day cancer treatment targets are at their worst ever. When the First Minister entered Bute House, 148 patients waited over 12 hours in A&E. Now it's 6,600. 3,118 people were on waiting lists. Now it's 7,700. There were 6,200 children waiting for access to mental health services. Now it's over 7,500. Nurse vacancies have risen from 2,000 to almost 6,000. And in 2014, there were just 15 excess deaths. Now there are almost 4,000. Life expectancy in Scotland has gone backwards on her watch, and that is shameful. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the First Minister gave us Hamza Youssef,
we must have a
the
question.
worst health secretary since devolution. Let me make one final plea to the First Minister. She gave a commitment 2 weeks ago to look into the case of 9-year-old Harvey Martin, who has scoliosis and urgently requires surgery. Desperate for help, Harvey sent the First Minister a video message, and she has not yet replied. So before the First Minister leaves office, will she reply to Harvey and help him get the surgery he so desperately needs?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, Presiding Officer, let me address the case of young Harvey Martin, because I have been taking time rightly this week to check with NHS Lothian about his case, and I can confirm that Harvey will be given a date for his procedure very soon, and NHS Lothian will be discussing the date with his parents when they speak next week, and I wish young Harvey all the very best. On cancer waiting times, more patients have been treated on both the 62 and 31-day pathways in this latest quarter compared to the previous quarter, compared to the same time last year, and indeed compared to the last full quarter pre-pandemic. More to do, but progress being made. Of course, Jackie Bailey's question was about delayed discharge, and I'm going to therefore end on that. Before I do, let me reflect on the fact that Jackie Bailey asked me my very first question as First Minister, and she is today asking me, if not the last question, then the last scheduled question on the order paper. Of course, when she asked me my first question, she was standing over there as the principal opposition representatives. Now she is over there. That says a great deal about the verdict of the Scottish people in the intervening period, Presiding Officer. And of course, I'm still standing here, which also says a lot about the verdict of the Scottish people. But finally, Jackie Bailey likes to do comparisons. So finally, on delayed discharges. Today there are around 1,700 patients classed as delayed discharge. That is far too many. But to be clear today, that includes everybody delayed for any period of time, even an hour. When Jackie Bailey was a minister, when her party was on this side of the chamber, there were 2,200 patients delayed for more than 6 weeks in our National Health Service. That represented more than 70% of all patients ready for discharge were delayed for more than 6 weeks when Jackie Bailey was last in government. Today, 96% of patients are delayed with no delay, are discharged with no delay whatsoever. More to do, Presiding Officer, but so much more, so much progress made since Jackie Bailey and her party were in office.
That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a personal statement by the First Minister, and today marks the final contribution in this chamber of Nicola Sturgeon MSP as First Minister, our longest-serving First Minister and the first woman to hold the post. And on behalf of the Parliament, I thank the First Minister for her service. I thank John Swinney MSP, the Deputy First Minister, for his service too. They have both been in government since 2007, and I wish them well for the future. I now call on Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you for your kind words. I'm sure I speak on behalf of the Deputy First Minister in expressing that gratitude. I have indeed just concluded my 286th and final session of First Minister's questions. And this is the final statement I will make in this chamber as First Minister. No matter what I do in future, nothing, absolutely nothing, will come close to the experience of the past 3,046 days. Being First Minister of the country I love has been a profound honour. I have led Scotland through good times, but also through the toughest period of our recent history. Exactly 3 years ago today, I stood at a podium in St Andrew's House and I asked the country to stay at home. My thoughts today and always are with those who lost loved ones to COVID, with those who live still with long COVID, with our young people who lost out on so many of the normal experiences of growing up, and with everyone who endured the trauma of separation and loneliness. COVID shaped all of us. I know that it changed me, and in many ways it defined my time as First Minister. Above all, it reinforced in me an abiding admiration for the people of this wonderful country who made such painful sacrifices to keep each other safe. In the toughest of times, our country showed the best of itself, with love, care and solidarity, and that will live with me forever. Being First Minister has been variously, often all at once, challenging, exhilarating and exhausting. But every single day, without exception, it has been an utter privilege. I have set out already my reasons for stepping down now. I won't repeat them today. Suffice to say, I know in my heart that this is the right time. After more than 35 years in politics, 24 years in this Parliament, 16 years in government, and more than 8 years as First Minister, it is time for Nicola Sturgeon, the politician, to make a bit of space for Nicola Sturgeon, the person. It's time for me to contribute in a different capacity to the causes I care so deeply about: gender equality, care experience young people, climate justice, and always, until the job is done, winning Scottish independence. And no matter how difficult change may be, I know also that it is right for my party, the government and our country that I now make way for a new generation of leadership. I have made my fair share of mistakes in the past 8 years, and of course there are things I wish I had done better or differently. But overall and overwhelmingly, I am proud of what has been achieved. The doubling of early years education and childcare, the Scottish Child Payment, widening access to higher education with a record number of young people from backgrounds like mine now going to university, minimum unit pricing, a policy that is saving lives, a publicly owned, mission-driven national investment bank, and putting the climate emergency at the heart of all we do. Just a few of the many policies that I believe will have a lasting impact on our country. As the first woman to hold this office, advancing gender equality has also been very close to my heart. My cabinet has always been gender balanced. This Parliament legislated for free period products and strengthened the law on domestic abuse. And less tangibly perhaps, but just as important, no girl in our country now has any doubt that a woman can hold the highest office in the land. I heard a phrase the other day that really struck a chord with me. When women lift, girls rise. I've tried as First Minister to put that into practice, and I will continue to do so for the rest of my life. Presiding Officer, there are countless people who have supported me along the way. Today I want to say a heartfelt thank you to just some of them. Firstly, to my family. Nothing, absolutely nothing would be possible without the love and support you give me daily. To my extended family, the SNP, the party I joined at 16 when, on a good day, we would hit 12% in the opinion polls. We've come such a long way together as a team. Let us keep going, serving Scotland together as a team. To my colleagues here in Holyrood, in SNP parliamentary groups, past and present, and to the central office staff who support us. To all of my ministerial colleagues over the years, and especially to John Swinney, the best Deputy First Minister and the best friend I could have wished for on this journey. To our staff in Party HQ who have built a formidable campaign operation, enabling us to win 14 national elections since 2007. To all those who have worked in my constituency office, in particular to my current team, Paul Leinster, Caroline Scott, Mary Hunter, Carolyn McConville, Irfan Rabbani and Nikita Bassi. You have had my back throughout, and you work tirelessly every single day to help me represent the people of Glasgow South Side. And to my constituency party and to my constituents, thank you so much for putting your trust in me time and again. To my special advisers, you have given your all to me and to the cause of building a better country. You have been led by two outstanding Chiefs of Staff, Liz Lloyd and Colin McAllister. To our partners in the Scottish Green Party, I am very proud of the Butte House Agreement. Thank you for joining us in government. And to our brilliant civil service, Scotland is so fortunate in the integrity, impartiality and professionalism of our civil servants, and I am privileged to have been served by some of the very best. I thank each and every one. But let me make special mention of those who have served in my policy unit and in my FMQ team. The latter, especially on Wednesday evenings and Thursday mornings, really do have the worst job in government. For the avoidance of doubt, Presiding Officer, the good answers have always been down to them. The bad have been all me. Finally, I want to thank from the bottom of my heart 3 groups of people who, because of the nature of the jobs they do, have probably spent more time with me over these years than with their families. At least I'm sure that is how it has felt. So, to my security team, thank you for keeping me safe. To the wonderful Bute House staff, thank you for always making me feel at home. And to every private secretary, diary secretary, correspondence secretary, to the visits and events team, to the communications and camera teams, to everyone in my private office who has supported me over 16 years in government, thank you for keeping me going. Obviously, I can't name everyone, much as I'd love to, but there are a few I do want to mention. My longest-serving Principal Private Secretary, John Summers, and the current incumbent, Chris Mackey. And last but not least, 3 very special people who individually and collectively have been with me for almost all of my time as First Minister. 3 people who were the core of my team during COVID, coming into the office while others stayed at home to give me the support I needed to do my job. Nicola Dove, Patrick Crolla and Gary McGee. You 3 will never know how much your care, kindness and humour have sustained me over these years, and I am so going to miss you. Presiding Officer, as I come to the end of my last speech here as First Minister, some final reflections. To you, I am sure you're hoping for a new First Minister whose answers on a Thursday lunchtime are not quite as long-winded as mine. Thank you for your patience. To my colleagues across this chamber, robust debate and holding government to account are the hallmarks of what we do in here. That is as it should be, and let me thank those in other parties for that. But maybe, just maybe, we might actually enhance our democracy if occasionally we, all of us, treated each other with kindness too, if we remembered that we are opponents, not enemies. And to my successor, next week we will find out whose portrait will go alongside mine on the stairwell of Bute House. Subject to this Chamber's approval, it will either be Scotland's second female First Minister or the first from a minority ethnic background. Either way, that will send the very powerful message that this, the highest office in the land, is one that any young person in Scotland can aspire to. Never forget that every day in this office is an opportunity to make something better for someone somewhere in Scotland. Do not shy away from the big challenges or difficult debates. You won't get everything right, but it is always better to aim high and fall short than not try at all. And always draw strength, energy and wisdom from the people of this wonderful country. And it is now to the people of Scotland, all of you, whether you voted for me or not, that I reserve my final words from this seat. Thank you so much for placing your trust in me. Words will never adequately convey the gratitude and the awe I hold in my heart for the opportunity I have had to serve as your First Minister. It truly has been the privilege of my lifetime. And with these words, Presiding Officer, I draw it to a close.
Thank you. That concludes the statement by the First Minister. I will now call on other members to respond, and I call on Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And while I believe the First Minister and I see each other as adversaries rather than allies, and probably the final session of FMQs reiterated that impression, let me add a little balance in my final remarks to Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister. When Nicola Sturgeon leaves office, she will bring to a close a political career in this chamber that few, if many, can or will match in its length. 24 years of service to her constituents so far, 16 years as a government minister and over 8 years as First Minister. Indeed, since 1999, she has been a permanent fixture in this Parliament and on our party's front bench. In these times of political turbulence, that is staying power that many of us could only ever wish for. She has been a formidable campaigner, as her political opponents over the years can unanimously agree on. And no one can deny that Nicola Sturgeon has left, for better or worse, a mark on our country. We have all lived through the Sturgeon era of Scottish politics, and that era is now coming to an end. And nowhere will that change be felt more keenly than within the ranks of her own party. But returning to the government role, and as First Minister, for Nicola Sturgeon and her predecessors and successors, it remains the rarest of honours. And even rarer still for what Nicola Sturgeon described herself as a working-class girl from Ayrshire. I recognise the positive message it sends that in Scotland every child should have the ability to reach the heights that they dream of. And you know what, Presiding Officer, sometimes dreams do come true. I stand here in this chamber as the only recent politician to beat Nicola Sturgeon. I won the bet. The bet I had with Nicola Sturgeon, made back in 2021, £100, and I won that. Just for the record, I have to say that I'm still awaiting payment, and it is perhaps one final example of delays from Nicola Sturgeon's government. But I mean it in all sincerity that the exchanges that we have, have been sometimes difficult, always robust, and we seek to do better in our politics. And I think the message the First Minister had can be listened by everyone in this chamber. And the First Minister has also spoken of the additional responsibility that she has had, and she said this in the past, to help every woman and girl in our country fulfil their own potential. And I think that as the first woman holder of her office, she has been a role model that women and girls can aspire to in Scotland today. These are all achievements for which the First Minister should be rightly proud. Yet while the First Minister is a talented politician, those talents have not always been used to the best of their ability in government. I'm not going to use this session to labour over the arguments that we've had on this side of the chamber time and time again. I simply say this, that on her first day in office, Nicola Sturgeon promised to be the First Minister for all of Scotland, regardless of your politics or your point of view. But for some, too often she used her position to further her party's political objectives, rather than bring the country together and govern in all of Scotland's interests. However, I accept that holding the high office is a great burden and honour. And I think it is right that on this day of all days, we acknowledge the difficult responsibilities that the COVID pandemic placed upon those in power. And along with the First Minister and others, I put on record our thoughts on this side of the chamber for everyone who sadly lost their lives and those who continue to mourn the loss of loved ones. As I said earlier, it's no secret that the First Minister and I are not best friends, and I'm sure she won't miss our weekly FMQ exchanges as she watches on from the backbenches. In my time as Leader of the Opposition, I have asked Nicola Sturgeon 256 questions. Once or twice, I've even got an answer. But away from this chamber, I know that political leadership also takes a personal toll on those who attain the highest office, and it takes a toll on those closest to them as well. I think we could all see that the thanks that the First Minister gave to her family and her staff were difficult for her to articulate, but are keenly felt. There will have been countless times that the First Minister will not have been able to have been there for her family and her friends as she put the demands of leadership first. So I hope that in standing down, the First Minister will be able to take comfort from having more time for family, friends and, of course, her passion, reading. So on behalf of this side of the chamber, while we have passionately disagreed with Nicola Sturgeon over the years and no doubt will continue to do so into the future, we wish her well as she leaves the office of First Minister and forever the future holds for her.
Thank you. I now call on Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today is a significant moment in Scottish politics. It, of course, has personal significance for Nicola Sturgeon, but is also significant for our politics, as Scotland prepares to face a new era and a twin crisis of the NHS crisis and the cost of living crisis. And I'd like to start by placing on record my respect and recognition for Nicola Sturgeon's more than 20 years of public service. I first met Nicola Sturgeon when I was a teenager, and that's not meant as a disparaging comment, it's a compliment. And it's safe to say that both of us have grown up and changed a lot since then. Regardless of our many differences, even our harshest critics would accept that Nicola Sturgeon is an able and formidable politician who has stood at the forefront of Scottish politics for more than 15 years. And while we have disagreed passionately about what is best for the people, I have never for a moment doubted her love for Scotland. And seeing the first woman elected as First Minister, an achievement, Presiding Officer, that cannot be understated, was an important moment for our country. It was a sign to women and girls, regardless of their politics, that there should be no limit to their ambition, that there was no position, no office in the land that they couldn't aspire to, and there was nothing that they should not be able to achieve. Now, I'm sure many people will point towards our more robust exchanges at First Minister's questions, but on many occasions, Nicola Sturgeon and I have attempted to build consensus, particularly in calling out and challenging the rising levels of prejudice and hate in society. And I think this is in part driven by our deep connection with the south side of Glasgow, something that the First Minister herself referenced, the most diverse part of Scotland. And I know how much celebrating the rich diversity in our communities means to her. I would even challenge perhaps maybe she's worn traditional Asian dress more often than I have in my lifetime. Now, there are many things that we can disagree and divide on, but there is one issue which I believe should always unite every political party in this Parliament, and that is the fight against prejudice and hate. In her resignation statement last month, Nicola Sturgeon spoke about the personal toll that politics takes. And I often reflect on how much our politics has changed, how much more divisive it has become, how intolerant it can often be. And the challenge, I think, for all of us is how we build a politics that, of course, allows for strong disagreement, passionate debate, robust arguments, but that never descends into hatred, because far too often, particularly online, our politics does descend into that hatred. But, Presiding Officer, it's not by the praise or the criticism of her opponents that any First Minister will be judged. It will be their record. And as First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon led our country through challenging times, most obviously during the pandemic. And I think she's right. I think that is what will define her time. And I recognise the immense pressure and the toll many of the decisions taken in those difficult years will have taken. And at a time of uncertainty and anxiety, she attempted to provide stability and reassurance to people across this country at the darkest moments. Now, Presiding Officer, I think it's fair to say that during our many robust debates with one another, I've learned some of Nicola Sturgeon's tells. When her grasp of the detail perhaps might on occasion escape her or isn't on her side, she is obviously quick to point to her electoral record. We've heard it again today. 8 election wins. Of course, undoubtedly a political achievement to be proud of, a legacy that no one can deny, and of course many of us can be jealous of. But she is right. Winning is important. Winning does matter. And that's why it also matters that leaders of whichever political party, what they do with that power when they do win and how they govern. And I think it's also safe to say that never in the history of devolution has there been a First Minister with so much power, so much time and so much political capital. But despite that, we all know there is still so much more to do. Because, Presiding Officer, the promise of devolution does remain unfulfilled. Child poverty is still too high. NHS waiting lists are still too long. Our public services are struggling and our economy does need to be restarted. And we must now urgently confront those challenges, and that must be this place's focus. So in closing, I am sure this government will feel her absence from the front benches. Perhaps no one as keenly as her successor. Nicola Sturgeon leaves a government and a party shaped in her image. It will not find a replacement like her. I and my entire party wish her the very best for whatever she chooses to do in the future.
Thank you. I now call on Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm privileged to be able to offer a few comments from the Scottish Green Party at this moment. And now, over the last wee while, I've heard both the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister reflect on how they might have felt back in their early days as teenage activists if they had known the role that they would go on to play in providing the role of leaders of government for Scotland. But my first memory of meeting Nicola Sturgeon, years before I stood for Parliament myself, was when she was providing opposition, not government. And I'm sure there were times when opposition meant saying no, but in the first year of this new Scottish Parliament, with the rights and equality of a marginalised group on the line, Nicola Sturgeon recognised that when the government does the right thing, the role of opposition involves being constructive. And in the law most often called Section 28, it was a nasty homophobic hangover of the 1980s. And in the first debate about repealing that law, Nicola Sturgeon said Section 28 is plainly and simply about discrimination. It is about singling out one section of the population and labelling it as unacceptable. Now, she was not the only politician saying so. But what she did helped to ensure that that issue was not seen as government versus opposition, and that rival parties with serious disagreements could work between them to find the common ground and work together for the good of the country. Now, I've agreed and disagreed with Nicola Sturgeon on issues over the years since then, but in recent months, she has shown that same commitment to stand by another vulnerable group in our society, while so many in politics and in the media were dredging up the tropes and prejudice of past decades and redirecting them against transgender people. So I can still see today what I remember from those days. Nicola Sturgeon's commitment to be an ally to marginalised people remains part of her character as a politician. Now, as I say, I didn't know at that time that I would go on to join the Scottish Parliament, or indeed that I would have the chance to sit with Nicola Sturgeon on the advisory board of the Yes Scotland campaign for Scottish independence, or even that I would share the stage with her at the Glasgow Hydro, of all places, even if we did have to share the bill with a certain Mr George Galloway. I certainly couldn't have imagined that she and John Swinney would pick up the phone and offer to negotiate an agreement which would bring the Greens into government for the first time in this country's history, advancing action on climate justice and progressive values, and in doing so, infuriating right-wingers, vested interests, polluting industries, and even one or two of their own backbenchers. So I also see today what I remember from earlier days, that Nicola Sturgeon sees the value in politicians and political parties recognising their differences but seeking common ground and finding ways to work together for the good of the country. Presiding Officer, on this day of national reflection, we all share the sentiment Nicola Sturgeon expressed a few minutes ago. And as for the things that her time as First Minister will be remembered for outside of the political bubble, I think for most people it will be her leadership during a pandemic that changed all of our lives. At the start, as we were just coming to terms with what the world was facing, some governments around the world chose bluff and bluster, pretending they knew the answers or offering false simplicity in place of the complex truth. Nicola Sturgeon made a braver choice to be clear about what wasn't known and to express the same fears and uncertainty that we all felt. Throughout the pandemic, she not only fronted up the Scottish Government response on an almost daily basis, but she did so with honesty, clarity and humility. And by doing that, she earned the public trust. So, Presiding Officer, whatever the future brings, I thank both Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney for their service to Scotland. I wish them very well, and my highest hope for them is that they continue to find ways to infuriate all the right people.
Thank you. I now call on Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, those of us who seek a life in public service must deal with events and times as we find them, not as we would wish them to be. Regardless of what circumstance throws our way, it is incumbent on all of us to commit to the task before us, to seek the best for our communities and, in so doing, try always to reflect the better natures of the people that we seek to serve. As the first woman to achieve this office of First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon has provided inspiration to the women and girls that will doubtless follow her to this, the highest office in the land. She has been Scotland's First Minister through some of the darkest hours in our modern history. I think it is important to recognise her tireless and substantial commitment to the office that she has held for longer than anybody else. And that tireless commitment was no more evident than in the worst days of the pandemic, a time of unprecedented anxiety for our country, when she offered a voice of calm to people stuck at home. She will be aware of the times that she has walked in step with my party, when she adopted our policies on things like childcare and the pupil premium. She will recognise the times that when we have voted with her, sometimes against the prevailing wind, on the physical punishment of children, on alcohol pricing, on advancing the rights of Scotland's LGBT+ community. She has acknowledged some historic wrongs as well, like yesterday, for the victims of forced adoption. She knows my background, and as such I will always appreciate her dedication, her continuing dedication to young Scots currently in the care of this state, or who have experience of the Scottish care system. Presiding Officer, good and bad, this chamber will debate her legacy long after her departure. The First Minister and I are very different people. Our visions of the future of Scotland and of the United Kingdom just do not align. But I recognise hard work when I see it. I am also grateful for the kindness that she has done me personally on occasion. Indeed, the words of comfort she once offered me in private conversation when my daughter was hospitalised are something I will not forget. The sands of politics, the Scottish politics, are now shifting in big and unpredictable ways. This is a moment. It is a crossroads, a chance to do things differently, and people are now looking for inspiration. People are looking for new hope. Presiding Officer, I'd like to finish by thanking Nicola Sturgeon and indeed her Deputy John Swinney for both of their service to our country, and I wish them well with whatever comes next. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is truly an honour to be speaking today on the resignation of the First Minister, though it is a decision that I and I think the country are still needing to come to terms with. When the First Minister became the First Minister, I was 17 and I was in the audience at Eden Court where she came to speak to voters and activists about her plans for Scotland. And I'm going to come back to that moment later, but for now I'm going to reflect on that plan for Scotland, because that plan is what brought us the baby box. It's what brought us the Scottish Child Payment, the promise, all emblematic of the progressive values that the First Minister not only brought to the fore of the SNP, but brought so many into the SNP on the back of. Now, Stop the World, Scotland Wants to Get On is rightfully a very famous campaign line of Winnie Ewing's, but Nicola Sturgeon didn't wait for independence to bring it to life. She has been an ambassador for Scotland, and that will serve us well when her successors deliver independence. She's also always stayed true to herself, and as a young survivor of sexual assault, this is the First Minister I watched stand up, not just when it was easy or abstract, but when it was difficult, and say women deserve justice. And I think we can also look at how she's spent the last few weeks in her role, when people can't accuse her of it being about keeping her position next time or winning applause. She has tackled misogyny. She has delivered a very moving apology for historic adoption practices and, of course, spent time with the care-experienced young people of Scotland, to whom she was the first to say the state does not just owe them a home, we owe them our love. And at a time that we were so isolated, so separate, Nicola Sturgeon was trusted, invited and welcomed into millions of living rooms across the country. Now, the last time I was allowed to visit my mother was before the last lockdown, the lockdown that she caught COVID in. And we sat in her garden and she told me all about what Nicola had said to her that morning, talking about the First Minister of Scotland like this was someone from down the road who'd popped in for a coffee. And that's the kind of connection that Nicola Sturgeon has made with people the length and breadth of this country. Which brings me on to the second part of her legacy, because it's not just the policies that she put in place, it is the people she lifted as she climbed. The women that she mentored, inspired, empowered, the people that she told their passion, their voluntary work, their opinions are politically valuable. They'd been disenfranchised and she brought them in and gave them a voice, and they are all a part of her legacy. And that includes me, because that day in Eden Court I got to sit in the front row and ask the First Minister what she was going to do to make sure that more women and girls would enter politics in future. And it's a question that's been thoroughly answered since, but I remember her specific reply to me, because she said, "Well, Emma, I would like to see more young women, Emma, making their voice heard, Emma." And those words led me here, and I think that will be the same for other women in this place, both now and in the future, because I see little girls dressing up as Nicola Sturgeon for World Book Day. And I think the First Minister has very safely achieved the goal that she set out in her statement earlier. She has lifted, and girls across Scotland are rising to meet her. And as one of those girls, I am confident that she will continue to inspire, no matter what she does next. Now, Presiding Officer, this has been a personal contribution, but as I speak on behalf of the SNP today, I know that we all want to thank her for her service, her selflessness and her dignity as First Minister. And I'm going to end just by saying I've read quite a few books on the back of First Minister's recommendations, and I cannot wait to read the books that Nicola Sturgeon is going to write. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am going to be brief. Firstly, because I know everybody wants to go and have lunch. But secondly, I'm not sure that I can go much further without crying. So just to say from me to colleagues across this chamber, thank you for your generous comments. They mean a great deal to me, and I deeply appreciate them. To Emma, I remember that exchange really well, and I cannot tell you how proud I am of you that you now sit in this Parliament making such a positive contribution, and who knows, may one day stand here at this place in our Parliament. Thank you for that contribution. Emma's is one of probably thousands of interactions I've had with girls and young women across these 8 years of my time as First Minister. And if I have encouraged even just a few of them to believe more in themselves and to stand a bit taller, then I will be very happy, because that means a great deal to me. More generally, Presiding Officer, to lead this country is the pinnacle of what this shy, introverted, that's still the case, not just when I was a young girl, but what this shy, introverted, working class girl from Ayrshire could ever have dreamed of. And this country is truly amazing, and the people who live in this country, no matter where they came from, are also amazing. As I've travelled overseas as First Minister, and that has been an enormous privilege, I have had the opportunity to see just how much Scotland punches above her weight. And I have seen directly the respect that we are held in by people right across the globe. Perhaps all we need to do now here at home is believe a bit more in ourselves. Now, even although I know without a shadow of a doubt that the time is right for me to go, I do feel emotional today. And perhaps the reason for that is that I know beyond doubt that even if I live to be 100 years old, there is no phase in my life that will be as special or as meaningful to me as these last 8 years have been. You will, of course, see me very soon on a backbench near here. But in the meantime, Presiding Officer, for the final time from me as First Minister to the people of Scotland, thank you from the bottom of my heart for the privilege of being your First Minister.
Thank you. It is now time to move on to the next item of business, which is a members' business debate in the name of Pauline McNeill. And there will be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and public gallery to do so before the debate begins.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.